I'm ready for it. I mean, you do have to go. You have to tell it again though. This garbage
I'm
story.
sure we're gonna cover it all. Like, I
Yeah.
can. I'm so excited about everything that's happening. So yeah, let's talk.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome back to Resident Skeptics, you guys. Now you might be having some questions, wondering where is Connor? I am sorry to say that he is no longer with us. He's not dead. He's just on a trip. Don't worry. He's coming back. But for now, you just have me, and instead of having a Connor Anderson, you have a Michael Anderson. No relation. You like what I did there?
I do. Okay? That was very impressive.
Great. Thank you. See, Connor doesn't... This is the great thing about not having Connor here, is that I can do whatever intro and outro I want. He gets on me for my outros and my intros. He gets on me for it. And see, he can't stop me. I can do whatever I want. All right. So when Connor looks back at this footage, he'll probably roll his eyes and smirk a little bit. But in all seriousness, Connor will be back. It's just me today. And today we do have a special guest. And like I always say, each guest is special because they bring something different to the table. Today we have Michael Anderson, who is running for NC House District 99. We're really happy to have him here today. He's going to give us some different perspective just about his campaign, just about who he is, though. I think that's what a lot of people want to know about their candidates. It's about who they actually are. So, Michael, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thanks for coming with no Connor, but we're going to make do, right? We're going to be okay. But I just want to start off just kind of asking you a little bit just about yourself, who you are, where you come from, what you do.
Yeah. So, I like to start out with, when people ask me who I am, I'm a born-again Christian. I was born again a little over 4 years ago.
Wow, so that was pretty recent then.
Yeah, very recently. And God changed my life so thoroughly. And he took me from a path of destruction to a path that's just been vibrant and full of hope and direction. And so, coming from where I came, I'm just not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. I'm not. And I know God. I know the power that he has over my life and the power that he has in this world. And so that's where I come from. And I don't apologize for that. After that, you have to talk about family because, family is the next responsibility.
Yeah.
And so I have a wife, Rebecca, and and we've been married for 12 years.
Wonderful. Congratulations.
Yeah. And we have 6 kids.
6 kids?
Yes, we do.
6. Wait, so tell me how old they are.
Okay, so one just turned 11.
Okay.
We have 8, we have 6, we have 4, we have 1.5, and we have 1 coming in March.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Wow. Okay. That's, whew.
Oh, and so they're awesome.
It's awesome. Yeah. I love it because I think nowadays you don't see a lot of like 5 or 6 kids that typically, it's just not how it goes unless, and the stereotype tends to be true unless they're homeschooled. Unless the kids are homeschooled.
Right.
And that typically is what happens. But no, love kids. It's a very, we'll get into that. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. And guess what? We fit that stereotype. We homeschool. And the funny thing is the bigger that your family gets, you tend to find other big families. And so we have many friends, family friends that have 6 kids up to 10 kids. And it's just awesome.
Well, you kind of like build like a whole like community together. That's pretty much what happens. So Connor and I, we were both homeschooled ourselves.
Okay.
Yes.
The whole way?
Whole way.
Okay. Because my wife and I have an argument about that.
Okay. So let's hear it. Yeah.
The argument is who's the true homeschooler, right? Like, are you the true homeschooler if you started out homeschooling, but you bailed when you're like a junior in high school and you went to public school?
I don't feel like that counts as being a true homeschooler.
Or are you a true homeschooler if you like found your way to the the right side when you're in 5th grade, but you stuck it through to the bitter end?
Ooh, okay, so you're giving giving 2 different scenarios. I say that those who are redeemed get to call themselves a true homeschooler.
Hey,
so the ones that come back, know.
Right.
But for Connor and I, what we both did is we I don't know if you call this, you might actually have to get your opinion on this. We were dual enrolled. So when I was 15, I did go to a local community college. And when I think he was in New York, he did the same. So we kind of stayed homeschooled, but we kept going in.
That totally counts.
Okay.
It totally counts.
It counts.
Yeah, because I mean, if you can knock out a couple, some college credit, why not?
Well, it's what I think with education is like, when I was like, let's see, pretty much all the way through on like my sophomore year, like I was writing like 2 to 3 papers a week. I like had to rewrite the Constitution, other things like that. And so then I got into
rewrite the Constitution,
like in modern terms. So not like, oh, what do you want the Constitution?
Not like the
to
liberal
be?
way, like
no, not a woke Constitution here.
Like that's a type of homeschooling I don't know about.
No. So this is the good one, but they kind of made us have to rewrite it in modern terms, get you to think through the Constitution and what it is. It was helpful. It was fine. But when I got into community college, it really was not terribly difficult for me. Sure. And so all that to say, I was like, wait, I'm repeating high school again. Like that's kind of what the first 2 years of like the associates kind of feel like is that you're repeating high school. Yeah.
I mean, I think so much of college is, I mean, depending on what you go in for, but a lot of it's, I don't know. I mean, it feels like sort of empty credits. A lot of people go in, they get 4 years of education, and they don't come out with a skill set. And so the way that I look at that is, if you need the paper, and a lot of careers you do need the paper. Mm-hmm. If you can knock out with North Carolina here, you can start college credits as early as sophomore year.
Yeah.
And if you can knock out 2 to 3 years of college and then just have 1 year and, finish up when you're 19 and you've got, take a couple boot camps when you're in high school or get some certifications and, 19 years old, you can have your entry level job, you can have your skill sets, you can provide for a family and you can get married, And that's, I am all for that.
Nope. Same here. But I did a little bit of digging on you, though, and I looked a little bit into your education. And I saw you went to law school.
I did go to law school.
Okay, so I guess kind of how did that happen? What made you want to go to law school?
Well, when I was in 5th grade, I declared that I wanted to be an accountant because everything I did in life, I made spreadsheets and I tallied everything, sports and games. And my mom said, well, that's accountants do that. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to be an accountant. And then as I started reading, 5th, 6th, 7th grade, I found out like everybody who was doing the things that I wanted to do, like be president of the United States, were lawyers. And so
they're not going to be a lawyer then.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, well, I have to be an accountant and a lawyer. And so I made that decision in 8th grade and I stuck to it.
Wow. So you did it like 8th grade and you're like, yeah, I'm going to stick to it.
I had to be a man of my word.
Wow.
And,
okay.
Yeah. And so,
okay.
Yeah. So I was born and raised in Seattle.
Okay.
And I went to the University of Washington for undergrad and for a grad degree. It was right there. I could walk to school.
Nice.
And, state schools back then cost you $3,600 a year, which is unbelievable.
Yeah.
And it was for a good education. And so I got my accounting degree and got my master's in taxation. So I can effectively pull that out and end this conversation right now.
Wow.
Yeah. Bore you to death with some tax stuff.
Don't do that to me, Michael. I can't do it.
And then I left to hit it big. I went to New York City, hit the Big Apple. And, I spent a couple years there and I realized pretty quick that you don't leave Seattle, beautiful Seattle, for New York City. I mean, it's like, come on, like there's garbage piled on the streets. There's nothing green except Central Park. And it's just, it was sort of depressing. And I wasn't in a good spot anyway, because, I wasn't many years before I was saved.
Yeah.
And so I stayed there for 2 years, and then the plan had always been to go to law school. And so I had been accepted and had deferred a couple years to go to the University of Pennsylvania down in Philadelphia. And so that's where I went.
And then you got your degree, and that's how it happened.
Well, I spent 2 years there, and then I went off to the Middle East for a year and a half.
Wait, so hang on, what were you doing in the Middle East? Are you able to say?
Yeah. So when I was in high school, so I grew up in a great family. My father died when I was 8. So after that point, single parent family, not a lot of income. And so one of the things that I was doing when I was young, aside from, working a lot of jobs, was looking for scholarships. I mean, I was the scholarship hunter. Like, I could have had a TV show. I mean, it was just,
wow.
I was on point. And so I had kept this huge binder of scholarships, and I had applied for every single one of them, and I'd won a ton of them, and they were paying me back money to go to, that whole thing. When I was in law school, I was looking through my old binder, and there was one last scholarship that I had never gotten around to applying for, and that was a Fulbright scholarship. And I thought, it's maybe I should just apply for it and see how it goes. And so the Fulbright scholarship is under the auspices of the Department of State. And so what happens is the Department of State, you apply, and the Department of State picks out a handful of applicants that they think will serve the interests of the United States. And then they turn that over to whichever country you want to go and study in. And mine was Qatar, which is a little country right next to Saudi Arabia. And they look at the handful that the United States deems useful to our interests, and they pick the one that they think is best for their interests.
Okay.
And so then that becomes the Fulbright Fellow for the year.
And that's what you ended up getting.
And so I went to the Middle East. I went to Doha, Qatar for, it ended up about a year and a half. I did research on Islamic finance. I taught at the university, both the men's campus and the women's campus, which was unbelievable. And I worked at a law firm out there.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Oh, I was part of the Harley Club out there.
Wow.
Yeah. No, it was amazing.
That I never would have thought that. I was just like, wow, okay. You must have learned a lot of interesting things though. Like there's gotta be like some cultural differences, I imagine.
I don't think politicians ought to be doing any business with Middle Eastern relations without like spending some time there, because there's just a whole different way of thinking. Like it's a whole different way of thinking. Right down to the way business is done. A lot of expatriates go over there and they get really frustrated because, here in the United States, you want to do something, you get in line and you wait in line. And when it's your time to do it, like, okay, it's your time. It doesn't work like that in the Middle East. Like that's totally foreign. Like what you do is you go and you find the person who has wasta. And wasta is an Arabic word for social capital.
Okay.
You find the person with wasta, and you don't even bother with lines. And once you can find the person with social capital with wasta, then they just take you wherever you need to do, and they handle it. And so, yeah. And so that's, a lot of people get frustrated with the system because you'll be sitting in line and then like 20 people will just cut in front of you, but you don't understand what's happening. And so, after a year and a half, I was like, I love this system because I was good at finding the person with wasta.
Yeah.
And
okay.
and your life was so simple.
Yeah.
You just get it done.
Huh.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Can you give like a practical example of like trying to find someone with wasta, like what that looks like?
Well, so, it was a little different for me because when I went over there, I'd been studying Arabic. My head was shaved. I wore a long beard, and I wore the traditional Qatari garb. So it's a white thobe and a white kufiya, and for all intents and purposes, I looked Arab. And that was insanely interesting to people over there.
So they knew that you weren't Arab.
No, they had no idea.
But you looked Arab.
They had no idea I was not Arab.
Oh, they didn't know.
No.
So
No.
completely. Would you ever tell them that you?
Well, yeah. I mean, as soon as I opened my mouth,
they figured it out.
Then questions like just it's just avalanche because like what's going on here? Like what is
are
happening?
you? Yeah.
Because here's this guy who looks 100% Arab, 100% Qatari, and yet like. He's got this weird accent, like a really weird accent with sort of broken Arabic. But I'll tell you, like it was wild because if I'm walking on the side of the street, I typically I would ride motorcycles out there. But if I was walking on the side of the street, the traffic's crazy over there. it's got a 6 times the mortality rate as the United States.
I can imagine that. That makes sense.
But what would happen is if I was on the side of the street with my big beard and my thobe and my kufiya, then these Land Cruisers would screech to a halt. I mean, just stop, and a hand would come out and say, cross. And I would cross. Because I looked like I was, what's called mutawa. Mutawa is sort of the, it's not like the religious police, but sort of like the people who are most serious about their Islam, their religion, because of my beard.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it was quite an experience.
No, I can't imagine that. That's crazy. Man, I could honestly ask you, like, I feel like so many questions about that. I was going to ask you, what about Islam? Did you learn anything about that? Because Islam is, to me, I feel like out of all the religions that I've looked at probably Islam the most.
Okay, yeah.
Because it's the most, I think it's the most opposing to Christianity as I can find. But I think there have been some people in America that have made the claim that I think like wokeism is at the most at odds with Christianity. I haven't made up my mind. I'm not sure. But in regards, I guess, to your experience, so that's really interesting. Never would have thought that. But you're not Arab though at all.
No, I'm mixed. I'm black and white.
Nice.
Yeah, yeah. So that's and so something about that combo. Sometimes you fit in all over the world. When I was in Egypt, I looked Egyptian. I was like I said, I was part of the Harley Club when I was over there in Doha, Qatar. And one of the things that we did was we were going to ride through Qatar, through the empty quarter of Saudi Arabia, over into the United Arab Emirates, through the Emirates to Oman, where there was a Harley rally.
Now I'm going to interrupt you. What exactly is the Harley Club?
Like Harley Davidson motorcycles.
Okay. Yeah. I thought maybe I was like, you're talking about the Middle East, and you're saying the Harley, but
they're
they
everywhere.
Oh my gosh, are you okay? I feel silly now. Okay.
Yeah.
They have
Harley. Oh, and they're fantastic abroad. Like for instance.
Wow. Okay. I'm learning new things today.
Yeah. Well, so we had a Harley Club, and for the most part, it was run by Westerners. But then there was a coup, and a Qatari guy took over, and the club got way better, right? And because like he had like intro to everywhere, and so we would go to like royal family farms. So there's these farms in the middle of the desert that I don't know. Of course there are farms.
Yeah,
no, it's cool. It's like there's lots of animals, and there's like, it's almost like a oasis sometimes in the deserts for really wealthy families. And so we'd go out there and we'd hang out at the royal. The royal family is very large, so sometimes there's people who are on the periphery of that. And the guy who took over was like 26 years old, and he had 26 bikes.
26 bikes.
Yeah, he had 26 bikes, and they were the most souped up motorcycles you've ever seen. And so, yeah, it's a whole culture.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, we could do a whole thing on that. Okay, but so you went there for a year and a half.
Yeah.
Okay, and so you come back and I guess you finish up.
Finished law school, moved down to Washington D.C. to start the career. Worked there for about 7 years, and then God moved us down to Charlotte, which was about 5 years ago.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So you worked as an attorney. Mm-hmm. Now you're not working as an attorney.
Now I'm working as an attorney.
Okay, you're still working as an attorney.
I'm still an attorney. Yeah.
Okay, you're still an attorney, and so but you're running for NC House.
Right.
Okay, so kind of how did that happen? How did you go from okay, I'm going to be an attorney to okay, now I'm going to run for public office?
Right. So, back in the day, back in DC, politics was somewhat of a god to me. I thought that conservative politics were, the salvation of the United States, and they are not. Jesus Christ is the only salvation that we have, and so that was a god to me. But when I got saved, God called me to turn my back on all of that, all of my gods, and I had a few. And so one of them was politics, and I just sort of walked away from that. A god of mine was it was really success, and I'm a creative. I love writing, and I wrote novels. I wrote screenplays. I would actually fly back to Hollywood as a script doctor for some of the most famous Christian screenwriters, like writers that wrote films like God's Not Dead, would hire me to come in and to fix up their scripts, find where the holes are, find how to make the characters more relatable. And I thought that was what I loved doing that. When I was not saved, I was 100% certain I was. And so there's a little bit of a,
hey, that's interesting.
Yeah. I had zero doubt of my salvation. I believed that Jesus Christ was the Son of God. I believed that the Bible was God's word. I believed everything in it. And yet, I was willing to have a savior, but I didn't want a Lord. And I lived with a ton of sin in my life. 30 years of addiction to some of that sin. And ultimately God had to break everything to open my eyes. And he actually had to convince me of the depths of my sin such that I wanted to repent of it. And so, when he did that and he led me away from all these other idols, for the first time in my life, I was happy. I've always been a very type A sort of person, and I push myself very hard. The God of success is a cruel taskmaster. Mm-hmm. It'll push you, and you'll never find any, you never get there. It just pushes you harder and harder, but it lures you in with the idea, well, you're a hard worker, but it turns you into workaholic. And so for the first time, I was free of that. And I was free to, enjoy going to the beach with my family. Like before, when I was under that kind of bondage, I hated going to the beach, right? Because
it gotta work.
Yeah, I mean,
you don't have time to hang around with your kids and your wife.
The drive was immense, and so 4 years of just living with God and Him teaching me how to do that, how to reconnect with my wife and my kids, and to build that relationship until it's strong, and to how to get into reading the Bible consistently. I'd grown up in a Christian family, but I was Bible illiterate. And most people who grow up in supposedly strong Christian families are Bible illiterate. And that makes no sense.
Yeah, that is one of the things that I've thought about with at least Christianity in America. I can't speak for Christianity outside of America, but I've just noticed, like with those who are, Jewish or they're Muslim, that I feel like they know their religious text better than Christians know their religious text. I think that's something that like Dennis Prager even talked about at one point. But continue on. That was just something I thought about.
Well, I mean, I think when I got saved, what struck me as very clear is, how can you say that you're saved, and yet and the God of the universe comes and dwells inside of you and has no visible effect on your life? How can that happen? How can you say that God lives inside of you, the God of the universe, and you have zero interest in knowing what God has to say? Like zero.
Yeah.
I don't think it works that way.
It doesn't. Well, it's how we hit the church the way that it is now. I mean, you have a lot more cultural Christianity more than anything, because I've, talking to people, it's like, oh, I'm spiritual, and it's simply another way of saying you're like a spiritual atheist. Of like, I want to say that I have the spirituality while continuing to do whatever suits me best or whatever works within the own philosophy that I've made for myself, and that's what happens, I think, for a lot of at least millennials. I'm more in touch with like the I'd say younger millennial to like Gen Z. That's kind of the situation that's going on.
Yeah, I think you find it up and down. I think that we don't find ourselves, our country, in the situation it's in right now, if you have a strong Christian presence. The Bible says that everyone who follows God will suffer persecution. Where's that been in the United States for the Christian church? It's been pretty much non-existent.
I was going to actually ask you, because there's some people, I think, this is a little bit of an offshoot of what you just said, but tell me what you would consider to be persecution in the church. Because there's some people that say there is, like with COVID, for example. Okay, so when the government said, hey, shut down your church, like, oh, we're being persecuted, or this, like, what is your thoughts on using that type of language for that situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it looks more like that than what we've seen for the last, couple hundred years.
In America here, yeah.
Right. Like, it's always been a benefit for the most part to be a believer in the United States. We started to see in the last couple of years, especially with COVID, I think a taste of what that could look like, where we start to see some encroachments. We start to see the power of the government to declare certain belief systems immoral and thus canceled. I think now we're starting to see what that might look like. I don't think that we've faced much yet, not even, with, the lockdowns.
Yeah. I think I can agree with that assessment, where I think you would be correct in saying it is a taste of what could happen if we don't like take proper action, I guess. And you'd have to define, I guess, for you what that proper action is.
Right.
A lot of the things that we talk about on the podcast, because we have a lot of different people on. We're starting to, and it's exciting, it's fun. Sure. And even hearing your story, I had no idea you were going to talk. I was like, this is awesome.
Yeah, right.
But like every issue that has been brought to this table has always come back down to not just like the nuclear family, but some sort of like foundational belief. And America is losing both of these, where we don't really have a great nuclear family anymore. I mean, we think that it's just kind of something that's happening here and there, but you have same-sex couples trying to create their perfect child, using, an egg from one woman, the womb from another, just really weird, crazy stuff if you think about it, or take something more simple, like just a higher rate of divorce, single mothers, things of that sort. And then you have, postmodernism that comes in, relativism that even makes its way into the church, where,
right.
We both, because we're both Christians, we both believe that there is only one way.
Right.
It would honestly be logically inconsistent to say that there's two ways or
right.
three ways. It just wouldn't work.
It doesn't work, no.
No, it doesn't. And so that's why I feel like the relativistic viewpoint kind of falls apart. But there's almost, I use the word logical. We have a generation that's very emotional. So that logical appeal isn't really there anymore.
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, those are kind of the two things that I notice. And I think without building those two things, I think this is just my opinion. I'll get your thoughts on it here in a second, about how the left is working very actively to tear that apart. I'd almost actually give a caveat to what I just said and say that to a certain extent, they are trying to create a religion. They do want you to worship the government to a certain extent, to provide what they think you need.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, I look at everything as a spiritual issue. And there's nothing that happens in the world that doesn't have some sort of spiritual influence.
Yeah.
And so I think when you deal with the political issues, right? Like I believe that there's very well-meaning people on both sides. There's very well-meaning liberals. For instance, when I go canvassing door to door, I've hit almost 10,000 doors so far. And I said to myself, I want to go. So my opponent's name is Nassif Majid, and he's an incumbent a couple times over. He used to be on the city council for about a decade. He's very involved. I said, well, I want to go to his neighborhood, right? And I want to go.
Very bold.
Yeah, I'm going to talk to his neighbors. Like, I was meaning to skip his his house because I didn't want to like tip him off that I was like right there, but I was going to go to all his neighbors, right? And then, you know, I transposed the numbers on his address. I tend to do that. And I ended up putting a door hanger on his house. And then, but I didn't think anything more of it. I go down the street and I come back about an hour later and I'm seeing a young man blowing leaves on the street. And he's standing right next to a Nasif Majid sign. Mm-hmm. And so my like anytime I see a person, I'm going to talk to the person. I don't care. And so I go up to him. I'm like, is this your sign? Is this your sign? And he's like, yeah. And we had this whole conversation. I'm like, I'm the other guy. And here's why I think you should vote for me. And then, but like, I didn't realize until later that was his son.
That's no.
But my point is this: we had a wonderful conversation. I was super impressed with this young man.
That's awesome. I love that.
Very, very kind. You could tell that this was a man who was raised in a family where they talked politics around the table, and I didn't agree with his points, and we pushed each other pretty hard. But my point of raising that is I absolutely believe he and Nasif Majid and many, many people they believe what they believe, which is completely at odds with what I believe. For like, they mean well.
Yeah.
But I believe that there's a spiritual element that blinds people to things like abortion. Right?
Yeah.
That tells you that it's okay to kill all of these children for whatever reason you want. Like you can have, many reasons. It's a spirit that brings people there. There's a spirit that says, I know you guys had Tyler Lee on here, that says it's okay to have, these yeah, I don't even know how to talk about
drag
queen story hours or strip shows or, and bring kids in there. It's a spirit that causes this blindness that people don't see it, or they're just not, sometimes people are doing the wrong thing and they just don't care and they're just trying to change culture. But a lot of times people mean well. And so that's the way that I go about it. I don't ever assume that you're trying to do the wrong thing, but I know that the battle that I'm facing is a spiritual one.
Yeah. No, I think you bring up a really good point, because it was funny. I was talking to a young lady that we know each other on Facebook, and we're both on completely different sides of the aisle, completely on different sides. But we managed to have just a lovely conversation.
Sure.
And obviously she didn't always agree with me. I wasn't going to agree with her. We knew that. But the one thing I can definitely tell from especially people on the ground is that I think a lot of them genuinely think that this is the right thing to do.
Sure.
And so I think, to me, it's unbelievable, the idea of transgenderism, right? Like, this to me, like, I know too much to be like, this is evil and this is bad. Mm-hmm. And I know that the people on the top, I know they have bad intentions because they're going after the money. When you're going after the money, it's hard to have good intentions after that. Mm-hmm. But for the people on the ground, they're like, well, if my kid's going to commit suicide, if they can't, transition, then maybe I should do this. And they're telling me. And so, and of course, that's horrible mistakes, but they do it anyway. But even in that case, I can see how potentially those are good intentions that just lead to really, really bad consequences at the end of the day. So I try, at least Connor and I can't fully speak for Connor, but I think one of the reasons why we have this podcast is hopefully eventually get people on that are on the other side of the aisle and be like, hey, we want to have a good conversation here. Like, no one's going to call each other names. You call each other names, we're done. Like, that's it.
Right.
Because you can't have a good conversation. That's hardly an argument. That's hardly a debate.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely with you there. And it really encourages me to hear those types of conversations happening. Because I think what happens with like Facebook and social media is that you villainize the other person. Mm-hmm. If they got a D next to their name or an R next to their name, like, we can't actually have a face-to-face conversation.
Well, it is an issue. There's so much polarization, and my district is 60+% African American. It's, a high percentage of Latino. So you're looking at 80+% minority. And, that makes it the third most liberal district in the whole state.
Wow.
By and large, I believe, I don't want to, speak out of turn, but I think for the most part, conservatives have ceded that ground because it's considered unwinnable. But for me, that's where I want to be. That's where God put me, right? God called me into this race. I wasn't looking for this. I wasn't even eligible to run at the filing deadline. I wasn't a Republican long enough.
So let's actually get into that. So we kind of went off on a trail,
right.
But no, I love that though. But I do want to kind of, this is a good way to come back to that question of how, so you said you turned your back on politics, that was your God, and now here you are running for NC House. So what happened?
I mean, isn't that how God works, right?
Yeah.
Like you could be pushing and trying to make it happen for yourself and scheming and trying to set it up and it's just not working. But then when you follow what God had meant for you, then he doesn't need a runway. He can just place you there. And so, my story started in November of last year. And that was a couple months after President Biden came out with his vaccine mandate, or attempted to. And then shortly after that, as you remember, all the corporations started doing the same. And by the way, that's the definition of fascism, right?
Yeah.
It's when the government forces people to act in a certain way, and all the corporations collude to make it happen. And then together they do away with free speech and freedom of action. That's fascism. That's the definition. And so anyway, my company, the CEO of my company, stood before all the employees in an all-employee meeting and declared, for the greater good of humanity, it was no longer sufficient to segregate the unvaccinated workers. We had to be removed from the workforce altogether. It was a moral statement that we were no longer worthy of a job. And so that's how hundreds of people found out that they were going to get fired. And that was a Thursday, and there was no further communication that day. We're a tech company, and so while he's making that statement, there's a chat room going that everybody can see, and people, colleagues are celebrating the fact that I'm going to lose a job.
Yeah. That's crazy. I
mean, I've been an attorney for a long time, and I've been in some pretty difficult situations with difficult people, but I mean, that was the worst professionally. And so no further communication that Thursday. And then I'm praying to God, well, what should I do? This goes back to what we were talking about believers, all who will follow Christ will suffer persecution, because I think everybody has a choice. And for the most part, believers in this country have chosen not to stand up and take the punishment. And that's why you don't have a lot of persecution, right? Who's standing up and saying, no, we're not going to have our kids transitioned. Mm-hmm. Right? Everybody's quiet. Nobody wants to take the beating, because there will be a beating. Who wants to say no abortions, no exceptions, because it's a child? Mm-hmm. Nobody wants to take the beating.
Yeah.
Because that's called persecution. Now, it's freely available to all of us, but most of us avoid it. Mm-hmm. And so I was praying to God. I said, what should I do? Because I know when good people say and do nothing, bad things happen. We know that. That's throughout history. So I'm praying, and Friday comes and goes, and no further communication. Saturday comes and goes, no further communication. Sunday comes and goes, no further communication. But I'm fasting and I'm praying. Because, I like to think of myself as a person of great courage, right? But I was scared to death to out myself. Remember when that was like that? Like,
yeah, no, I do too. I mean, I'm not vaccinated,
right.
And so it was, people who were vaccinated really just felt free to trash on anyone that wasn't.
Absolutely, they did, and you were immoral. You were selfish. You were not thinking about the greater good. You were possibly causing death to their family. You're all these things, right? And so, and I'm in a company where the CEO has just declared that I was morally unworthy of a job. And so, I'm scared to death. I'm physically feeling sick.
You have a family to take care of.
Got a family.
Yeah.
And I'm physically feeling sick because I'm just so worried about outing myself in such an environment. But I knew what I had to do. Like, that Sunday, God gave me the answer, and I had to speak. And so, and that puts you in other situations because now, like, from that point on, we had dozens and dozens of decisions to make, any one of them which could have cost me my job, right? And that's a conversation with my wife, and these are considerations. But the question is, who do you fear more? Do you fear God or do you fear man?
And that is an incredibly important question for this day and age.
That's the whole question. Mm-hmm. And so Monday comes along, and I posted in our company Slack channels, and I posted, it wasn't an indictment of my company. It was a word of empathy to those around who I knew were cowering in the shadows, and afraid and worried. And I just posted, and I said, I know what you feel like, Thanksgiving is right around the corner. It's next week, right? I mean, how That's cruel crazy. Is that?
Yeah.
Christmas is just around the corner. And I know that, the holidays are ruined for you and your families. And I know that now you're scared because you're trying to figure out whether you're going to take this vaccine, which you might be morally opposed to. You're trying to figure out if you need to go and try to find another job in an uncertain economy. You're trying to figure out if you're going to try to convince this company, which just came out so strongly against you, that your religion or your medical conditions are such that you should warrant an accommodation or an exemption. And I said, if you're in the same boat with me, here's my email address. Maybe I can encourage you. And I just posted that, right?
Wow.
And people were coming out of the woodwork. It was unbelievable.
Really?
But it was
crazy.
It was the toughest week of my career. Because I was hearing stories of, pregnant women.
They don't want to take it.
No, I mean, it wasn't tested on pregnant women. Not nearly enough as it needed to be. Single mothers.
Yeah.
Really? Single mothers going to lose their job over that? Like, right? I mean, that's personal to me. Growing up in a single mother family well below the poverty level. Mm-hmm. That's personal to me. People with autoimmune deficiencies who literally could not take the vaccine, but because Novant and Atrium were working together, like they were pressuring their doctors not to sign any paperwork.
Which goes against medical interest in the first place. It goes against the interest of the patient.
I'm telling you, yeah, no, it was messed up, and and so that was, and so we got together and we put together our own little Slack channel that's not work related, just to encourage each other and try to, for those who needed to find new jobs, help them find new jobs. For those who wanted to fight for their jobs, help talk through, because I became somewhat of a Civil Rights Act of 1964 expert, helping people, craft their religious accommodations because, you can get tripped up a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I started looking around. I was like, I was sort of the focal point. I'm seeing all these people, and I'm like, wow, we have enough talent here to run a company. I mean, there's
Yeah.
Like, there's lawyers, there's privacy people, there's more front end and back end engineers than I knew what to do with. And so what I ended up doing was starting an organization, and I called it By Many or By Few. And the goal was to funnel voters towards freedom-minded candidates, really focusing on this vaccine issue. And the reason why I called it By Many or By Few, it's after the story in the Bible, as you're probably familiar with, where Jonathan, the son of Saul, right, they're in a period of time when the Philistines are, they're oppressing the Israelites. And Saul has an army of 600 soldiers, and he's sitting over there under a tree, and he's on the sidelines, right? He's got an army, and he doesn't think he can defeat the Philistines. And so he's sitting on the sideline, and so the Philistines are free to oppress the Israelites. And Jonathan isn't about that, right? He's a young man at this point, and he says to his armor bearer, who's probably like 13 at the time, he says, it may be, well, he says, let's go and fight the Philistines, because he says, it may be that the Lord will work for us, for there's no restraint to the Lord to save by many or by few. So Jonathan and his armor bearer go over there, and they go and confront the Philistines, and they climb up this cliff, and Jonathan, and he swings his sword for like the first 20 yards or something, and he kills a bunch of Philistines, but there's no way he's going to knock out an army of the Philistines. And that's when God comes to fight. And God causes massive confusion and earthquakes and things like this, and drives all the Philistines the other direction. And what's interesting there was, it was a passage that God gave to me when I was just in deep prayer trying to fight this thing. And what happened after that was very interesting. Saul is watching from a distance, and he's seeing all this confusion. He's seeing the Philistines fleeing, and he does this quick count to see, if everybody's there, and he finds out that Jonathan has gone, and so he knows that Jonathan's over there causing the Philistines to flee. And so finally, they decide to join the battle, and so here comes the army. Now that that they see that something's happening, that some momentum's moving, right? But what's further interesting is the Bible tells us also that there are Israelites who had joined forces with the Philistines. Like they had sort of assimilated with the Philistines because they figured, if you can't beat them, join them, type of thing.
Well, that makes sense for the Israelites because they tended to take on the gods of other people and like the Canaanites and all that stuff.
Sure. I mean, it's a lot of people will if you can't beat them, join them, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of people did that with the vaccines. A lot of people who did not want to take them and who were scared to take them took them because they felt like they were going to lose their jobs, right? Mm-hmm. And it's fair enough. But, I always felt that the Holy Spirit was telling me it's not right. So I didn't. And so these people who had been sort of coerced into joining the forces of the Philistines, they break away from the Philistines and join the Israelites.
Yeah.
And so the army's growing. And as this army's marching forward, the Bible says that there's all these other Israelites who are hiding in the caves and in the hills and things like that. And that also happened a lot with the vaccine mandates, right? Like there's so many people who were just hiding, just trying not to be found out,
I've got to be honest though, that was kind of me.
Oh, sure. It was me until it was definitely, it was absolutely me.
Because you're just like, what good am I going to do by going out there? Yeah, that was kind of the thought process. And where I work, at least, I'm a state employee, so it was the federal was different than the corporate one that they had going out.
Right.
So I get it.
It's totally not it's not an indictment, but it's interesting.
Even if it was, Michael, I would take it. I'd be like, that makes sense.
But it's interesting how closely this paralleled our situation. And so anyway, these Israelites come out of the caves, right? And they're emboldened. and they come and join the fight. And so these three armies all come in and drive the Philistines out, and it's the last time the Philistines bother the Israelites in the Bible. And I found that to be so interesting because God always, what he's able to accomplish with just one principled person who says, this is the ground that God has given me. This is right and this is wrong. This is God's law. And is willing to, right? Jonathan doesn't know that God is going to deliver the Philistines. He says, it may be that the Lord will work for us.
Right.
It may be that he won't, though.
Right.
It may be that you're going to get slaughtered. It may be that the Philistines are going to cut your head off and post it, nail your body to the wall like they do to other people. But he's willing because he knows what is right in God's eyes. And when you can find someone like that, or if you can draw close enough to God and be someone like that, it could change the whole country.
Yeah. And so with that mindset, is that kind of what got you into that point of like, yeah, I'm gonna run?
So, there was a lot of choices that had to be made. I spoke to everybody that I could. I spoke to the general counsel of the company. I spoke to group presidents, spoke to director of diversity, director of people operations. And finally, I got an audience with the CEO. And he's also the founder of the company. And everybody was asking me, what are you going to say to him? Right? Because everybody had everybody had an interest in this. And I was like, I don't know. Right?
I don't know.
What do you do?
Yeah.
You go into a meeting like this and say Fox News says like the Epic Times read an article. No, like if someone's like if someone's like willing to fire hundreds of people over a vaccine mandate, like obviously there's not a lot you're going to say to that person. And, incredibly intelligent person, a person that's incredibly likable. I like him a lot. I wish we could be friends. It's sort of a little awkward now, but
sure, yeah.
But like just a great human being by every standard, except for like, following God. But, and so anyways, I'm like, I don't know, but I do know this, that the Bible says that when you're drawn before kings and judges for my name's sake, don't even prepare. Like the Holy Spirit will give you what to say at that time. That's what the Bible says.
And so you just went in there and...
So I said, God's going to give me the words. And so I just prayed and I prayed and I waited and people kept on saying, well, what are you going to say? I don't know. I'm waiting for God. And then a week before I was supposed to speak to him, God spoke to me. And I was sleeping and it was like 1 a.m. And I woke up. I just like sat up in bed and it was like this whole script was like downloaded into my head. It was amazing. And it was brilliant.
Well, if it's from God, then, fairly brilliant all around.
Yeah, but I want people to know that, though. Because, like, it's easy to think of God as being, he's God.
Yeah.
But God is brilliant. Like, think about that.
Yeah. I think the word that I always think of is, like, he's very intelligent, I think.
Yeah. Well, he's certainly that, but he's also brilliant.
Yeah.
Like when you...
No, that is an interesting adjective, and it's a good adjective to use for him.
Like when I think about someone who's super intelligent, like I'm not usually wowed by them as much as when I see someone who's just like a generational talent. Like, oh my, whoa.
Yeah.
That's what God is. Beyond that. And so he's interacted with me so many times since like I started to sort of do what I was supposed to do, which was fear God and not to fear man. And so he spoke to me and he downloaded this whole script into my mind. And it was just, I was like, whoa. And he told me to first of all, to thank the CEO for the years of sacrifice that he'd made. Right? Here's a guy who'd put everything on the line. and built a wonderful company. I've never enjoyed working at a company more than this one. And I'm sure that came at huge expense to his family and his own personal finance. He put it all on the risk, risked it all.
Yeah.
And so it started off really good.
Yeah.
But then God called me to talk about morality, which he wanted nothing to do with. And he swore up and down that, that the policy was not about morality. But like, if you're going to make a statement about the greater good of humanity, it's a moral statement.
Sure. Yeah. No, it seems pretty straightforward to me.
Morality being right versus wrong. And this was definitely that. And that's the one thing he wasn't ready for, right? Like, and so God called me to ask him three things, which was also brilliant because he's a man who had gone down on the miracle of the Hudson, which there's a movie that was done on this called Sully, where this pilot had managed to just a miraculous landing of a plane that had hit a flock of geese. The engines had gone out, and he managed to land it on the Hudson River in New York City. And the CEO was in seat 1A, and so he did this amazing TED talk about like three things that he learned, as he was about to die or whatever. And so God said, "I got three things to say to you," which was just blew me away. And he asked three questions about, was this moral? Is this policy moral? Is the policy moral to let all these people know that they're going to get fired in such a way, right? Mm-hmm. When all their, when their coworkers are like, cheering that on. Like, was that moral?
Yeah.
And I'd say I think that's not moral. And was it moral to fire pregnant women when it hadn't been properly tested on them? When they could lose their health care and their doctor at a time when they're,
Do you really need that health care at that point?
You do, and you really don't need that stress.
Yeah. I mean, your wife has had 5 kids, six one on the way.
Right. That can cause a miscarriage. It's serious, that kind of stress. Was that moral? I would suggest it's not. And then finally, is it moral to silence the minority voice? I mean, just minority generally. The dissenting opinion, rather than to have the conversation and let it play out. Especially, when such a policy has a disparate impact on racial minorities, and particularly my people, African Americans. In their language, this would be called institutional racism. That's the definition of institutional racism. Has a disparate impact on black people or racial minorities. Was that moral? I would suggest it was not. And then God called me to call him to repentance, to repent of his immoral policy. And if he would, then God would continue to bless. And if he didn't, then we'd pray that God would stop him. And that was the conversation. And it was intense.
Little intense, little rough.
It was intense, but sometimes God calls you to intense places.
Sure. I mean, so I guess what happened? I imagine he didn't change it.
No, he didn't. And hundreds of people got fired. And that was tough on me. But it's interesting, but God preserved my job. I mean, how did that happen? Right? And God did, it's just and my wife I love the Bible, because, to approach it the right way, you don't read it and say, "Oh, I don't understand that," and so that you try to make up you try to
create your own narrative, your own understanding of it.
There's a lot of things in there that you're not going to understand.
Sure, yeah.
Because your mind is finite.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way that you handle that is not, "Oh, I don't understand that," or "I'm uncomfortable with it, so it must mean this," which is something that's slightly off or way different. You just pray to God. You say, "God, I don't understand this. Let me know what it means." Why would God not answer that? And so anyway, there had always been this, since I got saved, there had been this passage in the Bible that had always bothered me. It's like there's a couple verses, and it said that when Moses talked to Pharaoh, God made Moses like a god to Pharaoh. And it seemed
that is interesting. That is interesting language.
It seemed almost sacrilegious to me. But like that's what God did for me, right? There was nothing that's prevented the most powerful man in the known world, Pharaoh, from executing Moses, other than God making something about him untouchable. I mean, that's the only explanation, right? The Pharaoh can get rid of people.
So you ended up keeping your job.
I'm still there.
Wow.
There's no explanation for why I should still be there. And so God made me untouchable for this season. And I don't know how long that's going to last. It could go any day. You know, I've got enough stuff on the internet where like people, you know, even this story, right? I'm sure people. Yeah. I'm sure people wouldn't like to know that I'm speaking about it now. Like people can find out where I'm working, right? But but like, you know, I know that God's got everything under control, and He called me to this battle, and you know, and so, you know, with the by many or by few thing, so many crazy things happened. But one of the crazy things that happened was God called me down to South Carolina. My company's based in South Carolina, to testify before the State House of Representatives. And so I testified of this story. And ultimately what happened was a law got passed in South Carolina, which gave some protections, not full protections, but some protections to workers going forward, so that they couldn't be fired as easily. And when I was down there, though, it really struck me. I was actually pretty shocked at how unsophisticated things are, like local politics. Like, it's pretty darn unsophisticated,
really?
Right? Like, people are like representing whole counties, and they won like 500 votes, and the other guy won like 300 votes. Like, it's
that's really not much.
It's really unsophisticated.
Yeah.
And I'm like, really?
You're like, could I do this?
right. And,
yeah.
And so like, and you know, at the time I'm unaffiliated though, and I want to stay unaffiliated because, like, you know, it's like, listen, I am very conservative, no doubt about it. I've always been very conservative.
Okay.
But there came a time when you send enough people to DC and you send enough people to Raleigh, and they like go and they waffle and they don't do what they're sent to do, right?
That is the biggest issue I have with Republicans. It has to be the biggest problem I have is that when we give them power,
right,
they don't do anything. Because
people don't want persecution. That's what it is.
I mean, it has to be. I mean, I don't know what else, because they're like, oh, you know, if you just vote for us, we'll do all this change for you, and then it doesn't.
I mean, there's already talk of getting a supermajority and moving the abortion ban down to 15 weeks. Like, well, our current law is 20 weeks.
Right. And this is for North Carolina.
So North Carolina.
Yes.
So there's already talk that if we can only get this supermajority so that we can overturn Governor Cooper's veto power.
Right. Do you think that's something that's actually going to be possible?
It's super possible. I mean, you only have to get a couple seats, three House seats, 2 Senate seats, 1 judicial seat, and we can everything that Governor Cooper has vetoed, which has been more than any governor in history. In the history of North Carolina. I mean, wow. I think if you, I don't know for sure, but I think the statistic was if you take all of the governors together in the history of North Carolina, he's vetoed more than that.
Are you serious?
That's what I believe the statistic is, but someone check me on that. One of your
well,
viewers
Connor,
needs to check that.
Connor, we miss you because he would typically check on this for us because he has the computer over there. But
but I believe that's the statistic that I've heard. But anyway, he's vetoed a lot. But All it takes is that 3-2-1 to get to a supermajority. But it's not that simple, because already you're hearing conversations about not eliminating abortion, but lowering it from 20 weeks to 15 weeks.
Yeah. I guess if you're pretty like strong pro-life, you protect life at conception the moment it happens, and that would be the ideal situation.
What difference does it make 20 weeks and 15 weeks? What difference does that make?
The life is still valuable at both 15 weeks and 20 weeks, so not much of a difference.
Do you really think that lives are going to be saved? Or will they just...
I don't think...
Or will they just abort 5 weeks earlier?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that you could save some, but I don't know how... This is going to sound very cold, but I don't know how big of a difference it would make overall.
And my question is, like, why are you trying to restrict abortion? What is the purpose to restrict abortion? Is it to just annoy people and give them a smaller window with which to work? Is that your reason? Because if that's your reason,
that's a good question.
That's pretty annoying to me. You're just trying to get under people's skin. Or is your reason that there is life in there and that killing life is immoral? I mean, what's your reason? Because like, if your reason is you're just trying to annoy people and win people and move like a couple numbers, then yeah, sure, bring it from 20 to 15 weeks. But like, if your point is that there's life in there, and that all life is created in the image of God, that life inherently has importance, and that we have a spirit of death in this country that infiltrates everything, right? Mm-hmm. Right? The fact that we have easy abortion means we have easy, sexual relations. We've got all that, mm-hmm. right? Like, and that erodes the family. Like, there's so many tentacles to this thing.
I think the thing is that they just make it's very political. If I were a Republican, I guess, that really just wants to make it, right? I'm not thinking real spiritual here at all. I'm just thinking, if this were me, all right, this is just my thoughts, is that, if I take it down to 15 weeks, okay, I show my Republicans, or kind of the more soft Republicans, that, hey, I care about this issue, but not too far where I completely alienate other people who might vote for me. That's how I would, which I'm not saying that's correct. I'm just saying it's sad that that's probably the thought process that's happening in that situation. Right. But you're correct. Like, if you are pro-life, it's about the life that's inside of that womb. Mm-hmm. It's about the idea that, and I actually wrote an article about this for Resident Skeptics, is that in order to protect life as a whole, mm-hmm. meaning from conception to death, you have to protect it at conception, because that's the only good standard. If you use any other standards for what makes life valuable, you find yourself almost killing yourself. Right. Oh, well, the child doesn't have... well, if you say, okay, at 15 weeks they're not fully developed, well, there's people who are born mm-hmm. without arms, without legs. Right. Are they less valuable? Are you less valuable because of your lack of intelligence, because of mental disability? Then you'd have to be killing people who are Earth side at this point. But so no, you're absolutely correct in that regard.
And it comes up, right? Like I said, I've hit 10,000 doors, right, in the mm-hmm. most third most liberal district in the state, and so do I shy away from that? No. Do I bring it up as like the first thing? I'll let people bring it to me, but when it comes up, I ask the question here. Okay, so you're for abortion. Okay, most people don't want abortion until right before birth.
Right, and that's the thing, is that those are the radical Democrats that really want
the platform right now. Which
to me is insane.
And so. Yeah, and so that's the platform, and most people don't like that. Most people are like, that's pretty wicked. Yeah. Okay, and so
I wish that logic would extend to the 20 weeks and the 15 weeks, but especially wicked, for sure.
But when I have this conversation, it's always the three exceptions, right? Mm-hmm. The three exceptions. You've got you've got incest, you've
Rape.
got rape, you've got, and you've got the health of the mother, the life of the mother. And, and it doesn't matter that those three are, 1%, certainly less than 2%. Rare. Doesn't matter.
Right.
You've got to face that. Okay. And so the question is, what do you do in the case of these three terrible situations? Well, the first one is the easiest, which is the life of the mother, right? As someone who's pro-life, you're always pro-life. You're saving life at any way that you can. So the mother's life is every bit as valuable as the baby's life, right? Nobody disagrees with that. But the disinformation is that the abortion somehow is going to save the mother's life. And that is disinformation, because you do not have to proactively kill the child to save the mother.
It's ignorance. It's pretty much what it is.
You can always attempt to save the life. And, most of these situations, they talk about ectopic pregnancies and things like that, which is just complete disinformation.
Right, yes.
But like in a situation where there really is the mother's life on the line, yes, you try you save the mother's life, but you also try to save the child's life. Like going in and ripping the head of the baby off isn't actually a very safe procedure for the mother either.
No, and a lot of women that if they, from what I know at least, when they get an abortion, they can have a higher chance of miscarriages because there's scarring on the tissue, and so it's pretty nasty the way it happens.
So many health issues.
Yeah, it's not a clean procedure. I think I was listening because Live Action, they were doing an entire storylines of all these different abortions.
Live Actions. I mean,
they're killing the game. Let's be real. But these women were brave enough to share the story of, really no real anesthetics, and a vacuum, and they're sucking the baby from the uterine wall, and you're just like, are you serious? This is not safe. And the stories were terrible and they're horrible. And the women, when they come out, they're so ashamed and they're so just embarrassed. It's like, this isn't, the media paints it one way,
right.
But the reality is far different.
Right.
And people don't know that, though.
And when you cower away from the truth that life matters, you never get there, right? In fact, you almost cede that ground. You just sort of cede morally. Okay, yeah, of course you don't want to, those three, right?
Yeah.
But you've got to face it. And so the life of the mother and the life of the baby, that's not hard. But now you get to the hard ones, right? Mm-hmm. You get to rape and incest. And these are tough situations. But the question is this: does killing an innocent child, is that the answer to this problem? There's three individuals involved here. There's a rapist, there's the woman who's been victimized, and there's a child that's born. Mm-hmm. Or conceived. Who should die first? Why should it be the innocent child?
Yeah, I typically say I'd rather have the rapist dead and the child live.
Why should it be the child? What right do we have to execute the child? Furthermore, why are we assuming? Why are we assuming? Anybody who knows someone who's been raped, it is the most brutal crime, because there's this mental component that it doesn't go away.
Right. Yeah.
It continues for years and years and years. It's a violation of not only the body but the soul and the mind. And it continues. And I would offer to you that killing the child doesn't actually help that. It's not balm to the depths of that that pain. And further, I would offer that the killing of any person makes it worse. Because now you've got to deal with, because we never talk about the mental. I mean, Live Action does a good job with this. Of all these, I mean, if you're looking on Instagram, they've got all these videos where, women are telling the stories about, this 30, 40, 50 years later, and they're still like, I can't believe I killed my child. And dealing with that. And, abortion is so pro-male, pro-irresponsible male. It's unbelievable. Right? Because all these men who are irresponsible, basically, I mean, because we do work with Love Life, which is a local organization.
And they've expanded quite a bit now.
And we come alongside young women who, are in this situation and who choose life, and we live life alongside of them. And there's many, many, many people who do this and organizations who do this. And usually it's not the young lady who wants the abortion.
Yep.
She doesn't want the abortion. She's not comfortable with that. She's in a situation where there's a man who is totally irresponsible, who's totally unreliable, who's saying he's going to walk away if she has it, who's like, and she's looking at this situation. She's like, oh my goodness, I've got to figure out how to be a single mother. And, I'm trying, like, how's this going to work? And he's telling her that he's going to leave her if she has it. And then the family's saying, well, yeah, well, what about your school? What about your education? Your life's going to be over. And she's thinking, I'm never going to get married with this child here. All these things. And there's so much pressure on her, but she doesn't want, the women don't want usually to get the abortion. It serves the man's purpose almost entirely. And we see this, and that doesn't get stated very much. Another thing about abortion is, when I talk to people at the door, I'm like, well, let me ask you this. The abortion data is freely available on the CDC website. Everybody's favorite CDC, but it has
Yep.
data.
Has some data.
Who do you think gets aborted more, males or females?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Females.
I don't know.
Is females by a sizable amount.
Do you have any idea why?
Well, I'll leave that up to the person. Who do you think gets aborted more, blacks or whites?
Black.
By a lot.
Yeah.
Who do you think gets aborted more, able-bodied or disabled?
That's an easy answer there, unfortunately.
It's not even close. Disabled. And who do you think gets targeted the most? Which demographic? What person gets targeted the most? People with Down syndrome. And then I asked them, do you know anyone who has Down syndrome? And a lot of times they don't. I'm like, guess what? They're the best people you've ever met. They love life. They would never think about disliking you just because you have an R or a D behind your name. Never even crossed their mind. Super happy, super excited, friendly, saying hello to everybody. They deserve my life more than you and I do. Why are they targeted? And people start to get real uncomfortable because, like, when you go to, companies like mine, we got these employee resource groups for the disabled people. Oh, yeah. No, but we're trying to get rid of them all. What, are you telling me that their life is not valuable? The pro-abortionists are sexist, they're racist, and they're ableist. And that's what I tell people at the door. Is that you? Because it's not me. And people almost always say, you raise a good point. Because nobody wants to destroy people with Down syndrome. because that's a nasty, wicked thing to do. And that's where you have to take it. But you can't get there if you're dabbling on the edge and saying, we're going to lower it from 20 weeks to 15 weeks. Or if we go there, they're going to get really angry at us and we're going to get voted out. Well, get voted out, but do the right thing and see if God will come and redeem this country if we actually stand up and are willing to be persecuted. That's what it's all about. That's the whole game. And the thing is, if I get elected, and it will be God's hand that does it because this district is unwinnable by human standards, even with the crazy effort that I've given. If God flips this thing, I'm going to have as many problems with the Republicans as I'm going to have with the Democrats. Because nobody's going to want that fire put to their feet. Nobody's going to want to be called out as being quasi-pro-life. I mean, how's that going to work? It's not going to work very well, is it?
I don't think so. Michael.
But we'll see. And obviously all things with kindness and all things with, but we're not going to go to a 15-week abortion restriction without me putting up a big fight.
And I think, as you're talking, I'm just sitting here and I'm just listening to you and I'm taking in what you're saying. It brings me back to what you were talking about when you said you were in D.C., that politics was kind of your God. And I think what you're doing here, at least, is you're saying, okay, no, God is God.
God is God.
And I'm not going to play politics just to have this up here and put God down there. And that's kind of what I hear from you now, which I think it's something that a lot of Christian Republicans need, because not all Republicans are Christian, right?
Right.
That's not true. I've heard Christian and Republican being used interchangeably, and I have a big issue with it.
No, it's totally not the same thing.
No, it's
right.
not. And I think a lot of Christian Republicans need to hear that. It's like, hey, you can't. You got to basically. I think Michael Knowles says it this way: "Don't squish," is essentially what it is, and that's what you're saying. Don't squish on it. Make a good stand. Because I think it's kind of like what you said with your company, is that there's a lot more people that probably agree with you than you think if you actually just say something. And I think for a long time, for Republicans, we've kind of just sort of hid, kind of like in that cave. We kind of hid away. And I think, with your story, with talking about, the whole vaccine mandate, and then for me, it was like the whole George Floyd riots. Like, there's a lot of people I've noticed that have made it into this realm here, this political realm, because of those things. Mm-hmm. And what I am really encouraged by, because I was talking with Tyler Lee, and one thing I tell any candidate that we have on here is that we don't endorse candidates. Yeah. Just to be like, hey, if you like what Michael's saying, you should vote for him. I like what you're saying so far, but again, we can't endorse you. Right. But one of the things I was really encouraged by was what he was saying was very realistic. And he was like, I can't change. I can't change everything in a day.
That's true. That's true.
But what he said though, which was really good, that I really appreciate, is like, it's going to take you. You have to vote in people that actually represent your values. Don't settle for less. Yeah. And I think that's going to be a whole culture change right there.
Right.
That's a big thing.
Yeah, and I'll say this, I have the utmost respect for Tyler Lee. I liked that guy from the moment I met him. But everything I've seen from him since then, I'm going to say I like that cat. Okay? We're not naive. Mm-hmm. That politics works a certain way. You go in there and you come out guns a-blazing and you call everybody out and you fight everybody, and not always willing to work with you. Mm-hmm. And what good is that? Like, now you're just the guy on the side shouting and holding things up. You don't want to do that either. And so I don't know I don't know how it all shapes up and how it all looks, but I know that there's a nuance, there's a difference, and it might be a fine line between like knowing how to get things done, but pushing hard enough. Like pushing hard enough. Like, are you willing to go door to door in the House of Representatives to everybody who's got deacon at such and such Baptist church and have a 15-minute sit down and just say, this is what I'm thinking. This is what I'm thinking about. And if you agree with this, and if I can get 40 other people to agree with this, might you be willing to stand up and push for no abortion? Might you be willing to do that? Now, I don't know. I don't know what's happening right now. I don't know what those conversations are, and I'd be foolish to say that that's not happening.
Sure.
I don't know, but conversations this early about 15 weeks, that doesn't seem like there's much of a fight. And I know that God has not given us a spirit of fear, right? That's what the Bible says. And when God speaks, is one of my favorite verses in the Bible. When God speaks to Joshua, right? Joshua, the warlord, is battling with fear. We have to fight fear. It's not from God. And he says, have I not commanded you? Be strong and of good courage. Have I not commanded? I've told you this before. Be not afraid, neither be thou dismayed. Right? Don't be afraid, but don't also be like, oh my goodness, this is going to come back and backfire so bad. Don't be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you whithersoever thou goest. And so with an issue like abortion, where we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that is the murdering of a child. We know that. I think that obligates you to at least give more than the usual political try.
I would tend to agree with that. I think if you made anything like if you were a single issue voter, I think abortion would be one of the main things to look at. Because I see an attack on life in the womb as an attack on me. I see it as an attack on humanity. It's like I said, you have to protect life at conception, otherwise you can't protect it at all. And I've been really discouraged because I've been watching a lot of this play out. And especially with Roe v. Wade, what I noticed was I noticed a lot of, I hate even saying progressive Christians because I don't know if they're all saved. I'm not sure. But I think it was hard to watch people try to make biblical arguments for abortion. It was almost a little bit, it almost kind of makes your spine just kind of, because it's almost, you're taking the word of God and twisting it. It's like, well, when it says that we're knit together in our mother's womb, tell me how that's a pro-abortion passage.
Or that God knew you before you were even formed.
Yeah, it doesn't track, and so and what really bothers me is what you're saying here. You have a lot of spirit to you for sure, but you're also speaking some pretty you're giving common sense, logical arguments. And it makes sense. You seem like a sharp guy, and you're also an attorney, and that makes sense to me. But it's like they don't care. And that's what really gets me and makes me not worried, but it saddens me a lot that those conversations can't be had because we no longer have a basis to work off of.
Oh, but these conversations can be had.
You think so?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I have these conversations door to door, all the time. And, and people would political consultants would say, don't go there. And I'm like, no, People want to know where you stand on that. They want to challenge you on that. So you've got to face it, and what you believe has to make sense. Now, I'm fortunate. Like, honestly, if my district was 60% Caucasian, I don't think I'd have any chance. But the black community, man, like, most of us grow up in the church. There's a base, I mean, there's different types of churches, but like, there's a base. There's a basic respect for God and for the Bible. And so I'm willing to go head to head. Now, I have faced pastors who have gone at me for an hour. This one lady pastor was swinging her shears in front of my face. She was so mad that I was pro-life, and she said God is pro-choice. As a pastor, yep. So I mean, I wasn't going to convince her, but I wasn't going to back down to her. Like, I don't care. I don't care what school you go to. I don't care what kind of degrees. I don't care what your status is. I've got the Holy Spirit. I've got the Holy Spirit. That's what I need. And you can be Albert Mohler, and I'll go at you if I've got the Holy Spirit. Because I read the Bible a lot, and when I read the Word, I trust the Word, which is even more unique.
That is an interesting point.
And so I don't back down from that. And so, I think that, like we talked about, everything has spiritual implications. And so when you look at this issue of abortion, you can look at it, and this is one of the things that why we need to be salt and light, because most people don't have the benefit of seeing the truth of it from a spiritual perspective. Now, from a spiritual perspective, we know that, in the Bible, there was always child sacrifice that God hated. And usually the deity was Moloch. It was a spirit of Moloch. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it was called Chemosh. It went by different names depending on which people group, but that was a spirit of Moloch. And God hated it. And one of my favorite, right after I got saved, about a month after I started this Bible study at my law firm, and Hebrews 11 played a big role in showing me that my faith was not where it needed to be. Like, Hebrews 11, the faith chapter. And so I wanted to do, for this Bible study, I wanted to do, an overview of faith in the Bible, and then a deep dive into why does God list these characters, these people in Hebrews 11, right? Why is Sarah mentioned, right? Didn't she doubt God? Why is Samson mentioned? I mean, wasn't he immoral? And so I'm like, okay, this was an awesome Bible study. It lasted like 2 years. But when I was like, listen, like when I'm starting this, I'm Bible illiterate, right? And so there's things in the Bible that I don't know were there. And so one of the people that's mentioned in the Bible is this guy named Jephthah. And so I read up on Jephthah, and I'm like, oh, what do I do with this? Because I'm an attorney. I'm at a law firm. Like, the story of Jephthah is about a man who was an illegitimate child of a man. He's chased off from his family. He goes and he forms this army. And then the Israelites, who don't have an army at that time, come begging him after he's been chased off, and they say, can you come back and be our king? Because we don't have an army, and we've got these enemies who are intruding. Okay. And Jephthah, there's the whole, the sort of the big part of the story is Jephthah makes this very rash vow to God. And he says to God, totally God doesn't ask for this. God doesn't want this from him. But he says to God, he makes this vow to God. He says, if you will deliver this, this army to me, for this battle to me, and I come back alive, I will sacrifice whatever comes out of my house first. It's like this rash vow. Yeah. And his daughter comes out. And he sacrifices his daughter. Human sacrifice. Right? What do you do with that? At a law firm. Bible study. You don't want that to get out, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm reading up on all this, and here's a case in point of how people say, I don't understand this. And so I'm going to try to tweak it a little bit to make it not offensive so that I can live with it. And so if you look at most of the modern scholars, they'll say, oh, he didn't kill his daughter. It wasn't a human sacrifice.
Wait, what?
No. Well, because there's some language that says she bemoans her virginity. And so she goes off with her friends.
She goes off for a little bit to mourn
her virginity.
Right.
Okay. And what they say is that means that he made her live a life as basically a nun.
That was never how I interpreted the story.
Well, it's not like when you read it on his face, you can't get there.
That's what I'm saying, is that
right.
that seems very silly to me.
But people get there because they don't want to deal with this very dirty. What do you do with that? They don't want to be embarrassed. They don't want to, they don't want to like peg God as wrong or all that stuff. And I prayed for 7 months because I read it, and I read these scholars. I said, they're not right. There's no way. He sacrificed his daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And that freaked me out, and I prayed for 7 months. What do I do with this? Because I can't avoid it. And, right before I was supposed to go over it, God gave me the answer, and it's one of the most beautiful stories in the whole Bible. You see, this story happens in the book of Judges. And, everybody knows the circle in Judges where the Israelites are with God, and then they move away from him, and then they get conquered, and then they finally call out to God. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
it's
the whole thing.
Yeah. So they're in this situation, and the Israelites, what the Bible says is they are being idolatrous, and it names 10 different civilizations, the gods of which they are obeying, worshiping. 10 different civilizations. But the only one that they mention is this god called Chemosh. And Chemosh is another name for Molech. And so what we see is at this time in history, the Israelites have become idolatrous, and one of the idols that they are serving is the spirit of Molech, which means they are sacrificing their children in the fire, killing their children. It's a form of abortion. And that's what Jephthah grows up in. His whole life, he's seen the Israelites sacrificing their children, and he's never questioned whether that was right or wrong. And the point that we see here with the story of Jephthah is that our society can taint our faith. Our society can and does taint how we worship our God. You look at our houses, you look at the food we eat, you look at all this stuff, and then you see people around the world who don't have enough. Our society taints our religion. And so Jephthah was willing and able to sacrifice his daughter because he thought that was like, okay by God. Like that was a suitable way to honor God. And his daughter doesn't put up a fight because she was raised in a society that said child sacrifice is not offensive. It's something that's okay to do. And so they don't fight each other. They both do this sacrifice of her. She goes willingly. He willingly sacrifices his daughter for God, even though God wants nothing to do with that. He hates child sacrifice. It's clear in the Old Testament. And yet, how does he wind up in Hebrews chapter 11?
That's a great question.
And so what we see when we really dig into it is that God is so much more gracious and generous and forgiving than we'll ever be. Because we see something like that and we're like, dude, you're a punk. Never having anything to do with you ever again. God's able to see beyond the taint of our society, that the societal pressures that cause our religion to be tainted and cause us to offer, strange sacrifices to God where we never were supposed to. And he's able to see that and still see beyond it and see our heart and see our faith beyond where we failed and still love us. And that's what we need in our current setting, because there's a lot of ways where we get it wrong.
Yeah.
I think your screen went off.
It might have there, but that's okay. We still have the audio. So we'll keep going here for another few minutes. But I think it's since our screen's gone off.
Yeah,
it's a good. Maybe that's our sign to call it a day. This has been an amazing conversation. Is there anything else you'd like to say? No,
but I mean, I think that just sort of ties up sort of how I'm thinking about this is that if you want to just take one more example from the book of Judges, which is something that God brought to me. It was the time of Gideon.
Ah, yes.
Okay.
Good old Gideon.
And, I was reading Gideon once and it jumped out, something strange jumped out at me that I'd never seen before. This is why you read the Bible again and again and again, because you guys see different things, right?
Yeah, I've heard of one person's like, I read it once and that was enough. And it's no. Can't do that.
Nah, my wife, after I got saved, got me into a Bible reading plan. And I'd never been through the Bible. Raised in a Christian family. And we read the Bible once every 9 months with all my kids and my wife and I. And then we do the whole New Testament in the summer. So we get 1.5 way through every year. And you see just new things. And in Gideon, we have a situation where the Israelites are idolatrous and they're getting in trouble and all that. But God's not angry with them because of the idolatry. It's not what's spoken. So he sends a prophet to speak to them. And what he says is that basically that you feared the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. That's what he's angry about. And that struck me because my whole life I'd feared the gods of America in whose land I dwelt. The LGBT movement, the pro-choice movement. The anger that comes out of those areas, it's unreal, right? The pregnancy resource centers that are getting firebombed and paint thrown all over them, that's real.
Yeah.
And the question is, do you fear the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell? Because if you do, that's greatly offensive to God. Because it's saying that God, your God, is smaller than theirs. That's what it's saying.
Yeah. And I think you're right. Like, that does tie us up with what we're talking about is, do you fear God or do you fear man? And if you fear a listener and you don't believe in God, well, maybe ask the question why. Won't get too deep into that because we really could.
Yeah.
But this has been really, really lovely.
This has been fun.
I've loved talking to you. You have so much in you, and I love it. And I am refreshed by a nice, genuine spirit that you have. And you genuinely seem to love the Lord and to love people. And that's what really matters.
Yeah.
But Michael, where can people find you if they're like, I want to learn more? What can they do?
So I've got a website. It's my last name, Anderson, the number 4nc.com, Anderson4nc.com. And all my information's there. And
we'll make sure that we link that into all the stuff. So don't worry about spelling everything out. It's too much.
And that's the easiest way to get a hold of me. But from there's a lot of ways to connect if you so choose.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, this has been just a wonderful episode. Great to talk to all these different people. We have so many more. Super exciting. Make sure that you follow us on our Spotify. Find us on YouTube. Find us on Instagram. We'll also make sure that all of Michael's links are down below so that you can make sure that you can check out him if you want to know more about his policies, what he stands for, all those things. I think that's pretty much it, and I feel liberated because Connor can't tell me how to do the outro, and he'll get to this at the end and be very upset. Okay, that's it, guys. Thank you so much. That's pretty much all I got. That was my outro. He does the outros way better than I do.
Hey, that was good enough.
All right, no, that's cool with me. I'm just gonna, and I know